I was a revenue leader for, a little over a decade, running sales teams, both pre and post sales. I think I always had like a knack for like wanting to start my own business. Even when I was younger, there was a point in time, even in high school, where it was like, I saw an opportunity and I went after it. All of my friends were getting bacon, egg, and cheeses in high school through the cafeteria. And it was like a $6 bacon, egg, and cheese. And it wasn't really good. And I was like, you know what? I bet you I can go and make bacon, egg, and cheeses at home. And I could sell them for $4 on the bus. I knew I had the aspirations to want to own my own company. Especially in the early days, I think it is so easy to probably give up. There was probably so many moments early on before I had my co-founders where I was probably, sitting down and I'm just like, am I even on to something? There's going to be days where it's just like, you think the sky's falling in and you have no idea what you're doing. You made this huge bet on yourself and risk. And you're like, oh my God, I gave up my salary, all this. And it's just the will to ignore those voices and keep on going.
Hello, I'm Tolly, aka the Podfather, and I have the pleasure of hosting What Makes You Tick.
And I am Richard Washington, founder of ticktalent. We are delighted to sponsor this podcast. Tolly, we've got a founder special. Who's on this
Founder
week?
special. It is Jordan Kennedy. So, fun fact about Jordan's company, basically all of the founders, their names start with a J, and I think they end with an N. Fascinating to me.
A non-scalable recruitment strategy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, really, really good episode. Really enjoyed talking to Jordan. He has a really systematic approach of going from being in a role and knowing that you probably want to found, and also a really high integrity way of doing it. And, doing the work, having the sessions, taking small steps to then actually found the company. So I really enjoyed hearing him share his story. What did you think of this episode?
Yeah, someone introduced me to Jordan and we had an amazing first conversation. And I was like, you're actually building a business right now. You're not even launched it yet. You're still in sort of the stealth mode. We talked about having him on maybe at the right stage of his business growth. And we decided that actually just being able to talk very transparently about building from the start, from the idea, would be a fascinating thing to share. This is probably going to be one of the best episodes that people have ever listened to, because it's like those first ever episodes of Diary of the CEO when Stephen Bartlett's in his basement talking about starting his business. This is Jordan doing the same thing. So without further ado, let's roll the VT.
Jordan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Jalou, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolute pleasure. And I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So, Jordan, what makes you tick?
It's a great question. So I guess I'll start out and say I just went full-time in my business. So anything related to my business right now makes me tick because it's constantly on my mind. So that certainly is making me tick right now. But outside of that, I have 3 kids. So my kids and my family absolutely make me tick. And then I think generally speaking, I'm the type of person that is kind of just obsessed with time and making myself feel good. And so I'm constantly trying to figure out how do I make myself with high energy and feeling great. And so that's the type of thing that really gets me going. And also just optimizing my time. It infuriates my wife to the point where it's I'm in the car and there'll be a route that's 3 minutes faster and I'll constantly be trying to figure that out. So it's saving myself time, making myself feel great, and having a ton of energy, that really gets me going.
I love that. I'm very much that. Oh, it saves 2 minutes. I'm doing it. I'm the same person. So what are some of those things that make you feel good?
It's a great question. And it's funny. I wear an Oura ring and I've now had it for I got a notification. You've had your Oura ring for a year now. And so I think the first one is sleep. When I think it's so important to get a good night's sleep. And it's so hard when you're a founder, especially an early stage founder, because there's obviously so much to do. But I think it's so important to get a good night's sleep, because if you only getting 5 to 6 hours of sleep, you're not going to feel that great. And I think 8 to 10 hours of work when you're feeling super productive and super energized is way more important than 12 to 14 hours of work when you're kind of sluggish and slow. I think that's super important. I actually saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday where someone was talking about these types of characteristics to think about for your sales team. And I think it was spot on, because it's if your sales team is not feeling great, not energized, whether it's like exercising or getting good sleep, like they're not going to have high output. So like sleep to me is like one of the most important things. And I think the second one is like exercising and being active. It doesn't mean you need to be like running 10 miles, whatever it is, but just going for walks, just being active. I think like sleep, exercise, nutrition, those to me are like the three most important things to like get myself feeling good. And then there is an aspect, especially as I'm like starting a business, which is just like the cognitive load of everything else that's going on in my life and making sure I have that under control. So it's giving myself the time and space to like, all right, I need to spend 2 hours today just to kind of like do these personal like to-dos because they've been adding up. And if that adds up, like then you're going to have like more mental stress. And so I think that's another important thing that I'm like constantly mindful of.
I love that because I think it's the little things that add up over time that you don't quite realize are weighing on you. And if you need to be kind of in optimum performance mode, which you do when you've just started a business, you can't have all those little things kind of chipping away at you.
No way. Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. So it's like I block out hours of like a week to do that stuff, whether it's like early in the morning on a weekend, or I'm like, you know what, on lunch on Thursday, I'm gonna spend an hour and a half. I get to sign my son up for like hockey lessons. And it's just I've been putting up, takes like 20 minutes. And if that's 20 minutes, it's filling out like Salesforce records. And so, I'm like, all right, I blocked off 20 minutes to do that today.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so you briefly mentioned that you just started your own company. I would love to hear about the company that you started and the problem that it solves.
Yes, absolutely. I'm super excited to talk about it. So I guess as a quick background to like what I was prior to now a founder. So I was a revenue leader for, a little over a decade, running sales teams, both pre and post sales. And I'd always had like the intention of wanting to start a business, and I can talk about that at some point. But I think, through my ideation phase, I naturally gravitated towards like the problems that I had as a revenue leader. So like go to market tech is kind of like the world that I'm playing in. When I mentioned, I was like very hyper obsessed with my time. And so when my co-founder and I kind of went out and we were like thinking about like different ideas in like the go-to-market world, he had some like calendaring ideas and some thoughts like in time. And so did I. And I like was thinking about it. And I was like, the way that I love spending my time as a revenue leader is when I'm like helping my team succeed. It's like when I'm like helping that AE like crush their quota, or when I'm helping like, the CSM get like that big at-risk renewal. Like that's what I'm doing like week in and week out. And that's where I add like the most leverage doing that. And it's not necessarily like me like jumping into a call per se, but it's like when I'm finding like that pivotal moment throughout the week. And maybe it's like, all right, this thing's happening this week. We need this resource on this call, right? So it's like, or maybe I am jumping on that call. So it's like, how am I finding like those pivotal moments throughout the week? And the way I was doing that was like constantly gathering a lot of like manual information, whether it was like in pipeline meetings or whether it was in Slacks or all the dashboards I had. I was like constantly gathering this information and then I'm parsing through it. The reality is like that takes a lot of time to go and do that. And so like there's got to be a better way to go and solve that problem, to figure out like where should I point my spear throughout the week? Like how should I best optimize my time? How do I find those pivotal moments? And that's really what we want to help revenue leaders solve for, which is like helping them optimize their time, find those pivotal moments throughout the week. And then also like take a step back and be able to analyze how they're spending their time and how their team is spending their time, and kind of lean into some calendar data to figure out like how can they better optimize like their time over time to be more efficient as revenue leaders and ultimately like be able to achieve like higher success in terms of like hitting their goals.
Okay. And how does your company do that? Is it through a software? Is it through consulting? Like how does it work?
Yeah. So we're a software product. And so the way that we start out is we would integrate everyone's calendar data into one singular view. And then we're pairing it with other data sources as well, like CRM data. So we can get a sense of, as a revenue leader, when I was at my last company, we sold to like CMOs, for instance, right? They were like the main buyer. So one thing that I would constantly be caring about is like, when is a CMO hopping on a call in like a later stage deal? It's like, that one time where like finally after like 8 calls, the CMO's finally hopping on. Or it's like maybe like procurement sneaking on because they're going to try and like ask for the discount, or they're going to try and like delay the deal. That's kind of what you're looking for. And so that was like the manual information a lot of the times that I was gathering. And so we integrate everyone's calendar into one view. We pair it with CRM data, and then we kind of can then pinpoint where you should pay attention to throughout the week based on like those key attributes that you care about. And then eventually with like, once we analyze your historical data, then we could tell you and say like, all right, on average, like, this subset of AEs or your team doesn't do well on like these types of calls. It's when CTO is hopping on, when you're kind of like in stage 5 and like you have 4 of those calls next week, that's where you should like go out and pay attention. So like that's the current state of the beta product that we built because we're currently in beta, but that's how we're doing it via like our software application.
That's amazing. I think that's so necessary for people to have that kind of heads up and crunch that data that you'd have to do manually. That's amazing. So you mentioned earlier briefly about you'd always wanted to kind of found your own company. What was your journey to being a founder?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'd say it was kind of like a relatively long journey. Like I think I always had aspirations, even when I was younger. There was a point in time, even in high school, where it was like I saw an opportunity and I went after it, where all of my friends were getting bacon, egg, and cheeses in high school through the cafeteria. And it was like a $6 bacon, egg, and cheese. And it wasn't really good. And I was like, you know what? I bet you I can go and make bacon, egg, and cheeses at home. And I could sell them for $4 on the bus. And so that was like my foray into entrepreneurship. And the fundraising I had with my parents, they were the ones who were buying the ingredients, and my dad helped me in the morning. We'd make these bacon, egg, and cheeses, and I would sell them on the bus. So I think I always had like a knack for like wanting to start my own business. But really, I think so. I started my career in finance, and at some point in time, like I knew I like had like the aspirations to like want to own my own company. I didn't know what it was, and so I was in finance, and I kind of like took a pivot into tech. It was like a huge, massive like career change that I had, but I knew that I wanted to start my own business. So if I wanted to do that, I needed like operating experience. And so I joined this company called BounceX, probably like a decade ago. And I vividly remember the interview. This one individual, his name is Dave, and he founded his own company. Like in the last interview I was basically having, he was like, I hope that this is the company where like 4 or 5 founders come out of it. And I was like, I'm sold. I was like, this is where I want to go. I want to work with these people because I know like this is what I want to do. And it was an amazing run. We went from like 10 to 100 million in 4 years. And like now there's like 4 of us that are like out starting their own company. Some of them are already like very successful, Dave being one of those individuals. So I was like, all right, that was like my, like how I kind of like started networking into like what this world was like. And now fast forward, one of my co-founders was one of the early engineers at BounceX as well. So I was like, kind of like somewhat planting those seeds in my head, like way back when, from like a networking perspective, like meeting the right people, joining the early stage company. So I'd always like been thinking about it, but when it came to like the current idea and where we're at today, I had always been very forthcoming with like my CEO of my last company, Bodify, where it was like, hey, I know what I want to do next is like start my own company. He was obviously very supportive of that. And I'd always thought in my head, like, after like 4 to 5 years of probably being at Bodify and helping it grow and hopefully like achieve a lot of success, like I'm going to go start my own thing. And so around like, probably 2 years ago, I just started to like think about it a little bit more. I was probably like at the 3-year mark, and it was like, all right, if this is what I'm going to do next, I probably need to like start thinking about it and not have some cold start. Like that was a piece of advice I got early on, was like, don't just quit a job one day and go and like start your own company. Because what you're going to realize is like, it's going to be 18 months after you quit your job. You're probably going to go through like a bunch of different ideas, and you're going to be like, I just like wasted 18 months, like trying to figure out what the idea is, not getting a paycheck, maybe not raising capital, whatever it is. So I just started thinking about different ideas. And there was one that I had, and I would go out and I would like talk to individuals. I literally like created a list of 30 people, and I like interviewed them over like maybe the course of a month when I had free time. And then I built like a pitch deck, and I would go back to them and I pitched it. And like I realized like that was not the right idea, but that led me to like another idea. And so then I like repeated that process, built another pitch deck over time. And then I did this like 4 or 5 times, probably over the course of like, 18 months more or less, where I just like would have free time. I would like call people on the weekends and be like, hey, I have this idea. I can ask you a bunch of questions. But like where that led me to is like to kind of like the go-to-market space, because most of the people I was talking to were like go-to-market professionals, because like that's my professional network. And like I resonated with a lot of the problems that they were talking about because I had those problems because I was a revenue leader. So fast forward, I had some like go-to-market ideas, and I went to this one individual in my network who worked at a VC firm, and he had a go-to-market background. So I just went to him, and his name is Jason, and he's my co-founder now. But I went to him and I was just like, hey, I have these ideas in the go-to-market space. I want to start a company someday. I'd love to just like hear your ideas on it. And he gave me his feedback on it. And he's like, but hey, I also like, want to start a company maybe someday. Do you want to like try and explore this together? And I was like, great. And like that actually like was a thing that like really turned a light bulb on for me, because I was like going at this alone. And the way I describe it is like, you're kind of like blind in the dark when you have like these ideas in your head. And I'd be like sitting like literally, at my desk at night, like 10 p.m. at night, thinking of ideas, and like no one to like spar with. And now I had someone who actually wanted to talk about it with me. And funny enough, he lived right by my in-laws. And so like on Sundays, I'd drop my kids off at my in-laws and we'd go to the diner and we would literally like napkin out ideas. And so that process and like us just kind of chatting every now and then over like a 6-month period snowballed to like get us to a place to like the idea that we currently have today. So,
Wow.
so yeah.
And how did you balance that tension between being in a full-time job and obviously wanting to deliver and deliver well? And I know we talked about that before, but wanting to still be really good at your day job, but also having your eye on kind of building your future as well?
It's a great question. And I knew like, I didn't want to compensate anything with my day job because I didn't know like, I was still working full-time. I had no intention of leaving anytime soon. So I had to be like, all right, during like the day, I'm just like completely dedicated to my day job. And when I have like these moments where like, maybe I'd be like going to a movie, like watching a movie, or like maybe I would like sleeping on a Saturday morning. Those are like the instances where I'm going to start like working on these ideas. And so like it became, you just had to have like, I had to have immense discipline and start like cutting some things out of my life where I was like, all right, 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning for 2 hours before my kids get up, like that's going to be like 2 hours this week where I'm going to start working on this. And maybe that's where I'll like start working on slides for like, one of the ideas that I had. So like, I think that it required just immense discipline, I would say, to like get to that place to be able to carve out 5 hours a week or 6 hours a week. And that adds up, right? So if you start carving out 5-6 hours a week and you do that over the course of 18 months, like that's a lot of hours that you can start working on an idea. And that's really kind of like what I did. It was just like I would basically like every month at the start of the month, I'd be like, all right, when do I think I can work on this? Like, what are the days? And there would be like certain days where like maybe it was a holiday and my wife would take like the kids to like her parents or something. And I'd have like 5 or 6 hours in a row to like really work on something. So it just required just like looking ahead and like constantly planning and just at times saying no to stuff. Where like usually I would say, maybe go out for dinner with friends on a Thursday night. I'm like, all right, this is the night that I'm going to like actually take 2 calls to like interview someone. So I think that's really what it was, where it's like, all right, during the day and at times, obviously after my kids are down, like totally focused on the day job. But at times, like when I'd find like those few moments, like that's where I'd spend it. And then once I met Jason, we kind of like held ourselves a little accountable where we'd be like, all right, let's meet again on like this date. So we always had like another moment where we can go out and like talk with each other, or we said like, hey, this month, let's set a goal to like go out and talk with like, I don't know, 10 people or whatever it is. So we kind of like set these goals that felt reasonable within our day jobs that allowed us to like at least move the ball forward.
And so are you bootstrapped or are you funded, like invested in?
It's a great question. A little bit of both, I'd say. So we have this philosophy. I mean, I think that I have a lot of opinions on just kind of like the entire like VC industry, what's happened over the past 5 years. I'm a big fan, I think, of like the VC industry in of itself, but I don't believe that like all the companies that have taken VC capital should have taken VC capital for a variety of reasons. I think if you think about like what the VC dynamics are, they're like talking to a company and hoping that you're going to be like, a unicorn, right? Like they're looking for companies that are going to have like that breakout success. And I think the reality is not every company has the profile of the market, et cetera, to have that breakout of success. But I think when people start companies and like given what's happened over the past, call it like 5 to 8 years, the natural reaction is like, I'm starting a company. I need to sign up for this VC treadmill. I need to go out and raise like a seed, Series A, Series B, et cetera. When the reality is, and I've lived this at companies I've been at, decisions are then made that are not best for the business at times. They're made to see if you can achieve kind of like that breakout velocity that you need to have as a portfolio company of a venture capital firm, because like they want to see like, all right, if we actually add 20 reps to the organization, can 70% of them hit quota, and all of a sudden you're going to grow by like 120%, right? And like a majority of the time that may not be the case, and that may not be the best decision for the business. And so I think for us, having been part of venture-backed companies, we're like, we want to just run this business a little bit differently. We think that we have a higher chance of success in the market that we're entering if we don't sign up for the typical like VC capital route, which is like going after the seed, Series A, Series B. We think there's a much higher chance of success if we can sprint to profitability, get to a place where we're 3, 5, 7 million of ARR and be profitable. And that could be a massive success for us as founders, a massive success for our customers. And we just want to preserve optionality for us. And the reason I said kind of a little bit of both is because we knew we would need some seed capital to kind of get going. And so we are actually closing next week our hopeful 1 round, which is a friends and family round. And it's basically like 70 people in our in our network, a lot of people that, we have in a professional network, and then some family and friends, and that's giving us the seed capital, hopefully get going. And then our goal is, to sprint to profitability, not to kind of sprint to like the next fundraising round. And so that's our intention, grow the business a little bit differently and preserve optionality. And it may not mean that we may never raise capital again, but it's like, in 4 years from now, if there's this opportunity and we're like, listen, if we had another $4 million, we can really like strike the match and go after it, then yes, we can potentially go and do that. But our intention is not to now go out and raise like a seed, Series A, Series B round. So
I think there was something really interesting in what you said about some of the decisions that people have to make. So what are some of those mistakes that you've seen kind of along your journey? You don't have to name companies or anything like that, but what are some of those mistakes? You kind of alluded to the reps one, but what are some of those mistakes that you've seen that people have made because they've been kind of funded and had to sprint through those rounds?
Totally. I mean, as a revenue leader, I think it is so much as like the capacity planning where, it's kind of like goal setting, right? And it's actually like a perfect time because it's year end and this is like the first year end and I don't know how many years that I'm like, I am doing year end planning, but like in a different way, I guess, I've done historically. But so much of it is like, okay, if we need to raise that other round, we probably need to have like this type of growth rate, right? So it's like, if we need to have like this type of growth rate, like we need to grow by X amount of revenue, and to be able to do that, like this is how we're going to do it. So there's like that type of like thinking and planning, which then funnels down into capacity planning, where you're like, all right, to be able to get to, to add $20 million in revenue next year, we need to go from like 10 reps to 18 reps because like, the quotas are X, and if it's all $1 million quotas, there's $18 million quota, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I have felt that numerous times at multiple organizations where it was top-down planning because we had to try and achieve some sort of growth rate. And so the way that funneled down was, all right, we're going to have to hire this many reps to get there. And it's such a mistake to build your business plan in that mindset because you're ignoring so many factors that are so important when it comes into like running a go-to-market team. Just like the aspect of like, how much pipeline are we generating? Can that pipeline actually like support that many reps? Like, do we actually like have enough pipeline to support all of our current reps? Like, are all of our, do we have 80% of our team actually on quota? And so I think it's like, a lot of, I felt it literally in 3 different organizations where like that was kind of like the mindset. And I understand because the businesses were running as VC-backed companies. And so they knew they had, profitability was not something that a lot of people talked about back in, 2018, 2019. It was kind of like grow, grow, grow. So it was, we need to grow at this level, which means we had to have this much revenue. And to be able to do that, we need to hire this many reps. And like, there were moments where I was like, this is not possible. Like, it's like, this is like fundamentally not possible to like bring on this many reps. Like, people are going to be sitting here and literally like twiddling your thumbs if we bring on this much, this many people. But as, the executives in the business and CEOs, founders, I understand completely why those decisions had to be made because they're looking at it as like, we're going to have to raise this capital. And in order for us to be able to raise that capital, this is the growth that we probably need to have to be able to get like the right terms, et cetera, et cetera. So you're kind of between like a rock and a hard place when you're in that situation. And so I think those are the types of decisions that I've seen then ripple down and affects the culture of your team, right? If all of a sudden not everyone's on a quota and people are complaining about pipeline, which obviously happens a lot, but like in ways where it's actually like justified, and then you're being asked to like go out and have to hire more people to the team, like then all of a sudden that erodes sales culture. And there's so many ramifications of that. And I think that's where like we looked at it. It was like, we think we can just build a business differently in the way that we want to build it and preserve that type of like decision-making for like us and what's going to be best for our customers, the employees we may have, the owners, investors and our friends and family around. So I think that's the direction that we wanted to go.
Because I think some of those things that you don't necessarily think about, because it's almost like you're trying to solve the equation from the end, right? And having to fill it back in, as opposed to doing all the stuff and adding in extra bits to then get to that number at the end, like a bit more organically. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny. One of the first times my co-founder and I, Jason, met was like, we were actually teaching a class on this exact topic, talking about like forecasting from like the top down versus the bottom up. And it's so important to think about things from like a bottoms up perspective and think about like, to your point, like all those variables that kind of go into it and like, can we make that happen? So, which I think doesn't always happen. So, yeah.
Okay. That's fascinating. And kind of along the journey, so you mentioned you got a wife and kids. What was that journey like getting from kind of, I'm in a job where I get paid decently well every month to I'm going to be doing this thing and I don't know what the pay might look like?
Totally. So I remember this like vividly, like the minute that I like knew like this was going to be like the next thing for me, literally the first thing I did, like I had a kind of like a little idea in my head, but like literally the first thing I did was I built a budget for my family.
Right.
I'm very like, I would say it's something I'm constantly doing is like, I'm the like monthly planner in the house, which my wife would say, but I built basically like a 2-year budget, where I was like, okay, if I do this, these are like the monthly expenses that we kind of have. And if I went like, say, salary list, like we didn't, like there was no way I was going to pay myself. Because I was like, I need to give myself at least 2 years to get a business off the ground. So I was like, in the worst case scenario, if I went salary list for 2 years and these are our monthly expenses, and like making an assumption, obviously, like my wife, she works at a big tech firm. So, assuming like she has like a relatively like stable job, this is how much money we would need to like fund our life. Because like there are certain things like, as a parent, as a founder with kids, it's like, I can't cut out, like we can't cut out childcare. We can't cut out preschool. We can't cut out kids' activities. Like I can't go and live in a like studio apartment on like the ground floor and eat ramen. Like it's just not possible. There are things that we will give up, right? Like we love to travel. And so maybe we're going to travel less now. So there are certainly things in like trade-offs that we're making, but they're just fundamental. Like there's a certain line of expenses that like you have to have. And unfortunately, as a parent, it's really expensive to like be a parent, regardless of where you are in the country. So like I built out a budget, and the next thing I did is I sat down with my wife, and she always knew that I always like wanted to like start a company, and she has been 100% supportive from the get-go. But I told her, I was like, listen, if this is gonna be my next thing, like I just want you to see like how this works for us from a financial perspective. And I think she was like so appreciative that I had like that much, I put like that much thought into it. And then also I was like bringing her in and like talking to her about this in this way. Like she was almost like part from like the start of this journey, which was like, hey, this is how it's going to affect us, for our personal lives. She obviously understands like what the impact could be like down the road if we're successful. But she was like 100% on board from that moment on until like to this very day. But like that type of exercise is something that we're kind of like constantly going back to, especially now that I'm actually like, full-time in the business and whatnot. So it's something that's like constant where you're thinking about that. It's like, how do we like ebb and flow our life? Because it's like, I want to be a great dad. Like, I don't want to have to like, of course there's trade-offs always, right? But it's like, I don't want to constantly be missing stuff from my kids. I don't want to be like an absent father. So it's like something that's like, we're very mindful of, and I'm very mindful of, which is why how I spend my time is just like so crucial. Because it's like, if I spend 4 hours and I waste them, those are 4 hours that I can't just like work from the hours of like maybe like 6 to 10 and get them back. Cause like that's when I'm having dinner with my kids and putting my kids down. I'm like, again, if there's a fire once in a while, yes, I will like trade those hours, but like I don't want it to be consistent. So there's a long-winded way to kind of answer the question. But yeah, my wife's supportive, and it was just like from the get-go, it was like that was the first exercise that I did, and I brought her in, and I'm just, we're constantly talking about it. So,
and I think that's really practical for people to start thinking about. So thank you so much for sharing that. And so, Jordan, what are some of the lessons that you've learned as a founder? What are some of the things that you had to do, even just in terms of getting your co-founders?
Sure. I think the biggest lesson and the like number one thing I would recommend to people is just start talking to people. I mean, it's great if you're at a company and like you have this idea and you've got people there and you're talking about it, and like that becomes like your co-founders and like you're off to the races. I think that's phenomenal, but a lot of people I talk to, that's just not the case. It's like usually it's like someone has an idea and then they're like, all right, what do I do next? And I think for me, once I knew that's what that was going to be the next step, I just went out and started talking to people. And so I obviously cannot code. I am a revenue leader. I knew I couldn't build a product, and I didn't want to outsource any of the like technical build from the start. Like I knew I wanted a technical co-founder. So what I did was like, once I like knew that this was gonna be the next step, I literally went through like all of my LinkedIn contacts. And I was like, who are like, I knew people off the top of my head. I was like, who are like people that I know like that, or engineers that would maybe want to do this. But I also went through like my LinkedIn and like marked people who were like technical. And like there were certain people that I reached out to that I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. And I was just like, hey, I hope you remember me from like our days back in this company. I would love to just catch up, see what you're up to. Like I'm thinking about starting a company someday. I would just love some feedback. And like everyone was receptive. Everyone would get on the phone and talk to me. And it was, some people were very like forthcoming, meaning like, hey, I'm happy to help in any way I can. I have no aspirations to be a founder. Like I don't want that for myself, but like maybe I can connect with this person. And so some of the early conversations were like kind of like that, where it's like, hey, I think I know someone who may want to do this. like, let me introduce you to this person, which is why I say like just going out and having those conversations is completely worthwhile. But I'd say I definitely had like a few people in mind. One of them is now my current co-founder, Justin, who was one of the early engineers at BalanceX, which was the company that I mentioned a little bit ago. And when I had this intention of starting a company, it probably had been at least 4 or 5 years since we like chatted. I mean, like COVID had happened in between, like we both left BalanceX. So like a lot of life had happened and we just kind of like, fell out of touch. He had moved to Oregon, but he was one of the first people that I thought of, just because I also knew that like some of my other friends who were thinking about starting a company or had started the company, like had him in like the list of like, this could be someone that really wants to start a company someday. And so I reached out to him and like kind of like told him my idea. And I was like, we just kind of like caught up on life. And we like kind of left the first conversation, which was like, let's just keep talking. And so like every like 3 or 4 months, I'd ping him and was like, hey, you want to catch up? And I would tell him about like my newest thing that I was thinking about. And he'd be like, yeah, okay. And then we would just kind of like keep talking. And fast forward at the start of this year, he was like, I'm ready for change. Like, and I think like now I'm kind of like, I'm now at the place where like, I want to do this. I want to like start something. And like, he absolutely had to believe in the idea, but I think like part of the journey too is just like, who are you getting on the bus with? And so I think like the relationship that we built over the course of that time, as we were talking, was like obviously very crucial to like the partnership that we were building. I mean, of course, knew each other from our previous role, but like that wouldn't have happened if I just didn't go out and start talking to people. It's like if I didn't reach out to him, it had been 5-6 years, right? Like if I didn't reach out to him, if I didn't reach out to other people, like you don't know where those conversations are going to go. And the one thing that I've learned just being an early stage founder is like people want to help you. Like if you are like probably a genuine good person, you were nice to people, like people want to help you succeed because they love these stories, all right, of like, the underdog, early stage founder, they want to see you succeed and everyone's willing to help. So like when I told people like, oh, I just want to get connected to technical talent, a bunch of people made introductions or like gave me different ideas. So that'd be like my recommendation to people who are like kind of like thinking about this is like, just go out and put yourself out there and just talk to people.
So it sounds like a lot of the stuff that you learned as a revenue leader is some of the stuff that's helping you now. What are some of the skills that you're finding yourself having to learn as a founder that weren't necessarily already in your skill set as a revenue leader?
I mean, a huge one is related to like anything on the product and engineering side. I mean, and I like my two co-founders are amazing when it comes to like product building and like how they think about product. But I would say that is a muscle that like you a little bit as a revenue leader will flex the product muscle, which is like, hey, we're hearing all of this from customers, yes. Right? Like, it's like all of these customers are saying they're going to churn if like we can't do X, and like you're in those meetings, right? And so like I kind of had a little bit of that muscle, but when it comes to like actually thinking about like how do you build this product, how do you take this idea, put it on paper, think about product roadmap. Just even in a little bit of time we've been doing this, like I feel like it's been like a crash course on product development and thinking about that. So that has been something, and again, so thankful for my co-founders because they're so good at that. That it's helped me be like, oh, this all like makes sense now. Like, yes. And going back to what we were just talking about as it relates to co-founders, like when Justin kind of like came to Jason and I and he heard about our idea, he literally on paper put out what a product roadmap would look like that almost like read like a storyboard of like how he would bring our product to life. And I was like, this is who we need to work with. Like, it was amazing. It was like an amazing feeling. It was like, how do you take this idea that we have in our head or in spreadsheets and bring it to life? And he did that. So I think like that's been a big muscle that I've had to flex. Another one, there's like other areas too, which I wasn't doing as a revenue leader. Like a good one is like, I've now trying to like start like LinkedIn posting. Like I've now like, I'm a big believer in just like having to build a founder brand and I see the merits of it. And there were some other founders who kind of like pushed me to do that, which was like out of my comfort zone. But I will say like, that is a go-to-market activity. I just wasn't doing that. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, I wish like either I or like I had pushed other people in my go-to-market org who probably could have been doing that to go and do that. So there's like those types of activities that I wasn't doing as a revenue leader that I'm now doing, but there are certainly things that are just like not even related to like the revenue leader like realm that you have to do as a founder. Like even things like you have to go figure out health insurance. Like there was like a week where like when Justin was full time, like him and I were trying to figure out health insurance. And I was like, oh my God, it's so convoluted. So there were types of things that are just like not sexy and they take up like a ton of time. Yeah. At least building product is fun and it's like exciting, but like health insurance, like figuring that out is not fun. So there's those types of things that you definitely have to get into like the weeds of.
And you mentioned about go-to-market activities. So what does go-to-market look like for you guys?
It's a great question. And so it's funny. We're in this stage. So we kind of just launched a couple of weeks ago. Like we're in the beta stage.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so we have some beta customers, and it's like the product, the way I would describe things like in the current state is like we have like certainly a product that works, that provides value, but we're probably not in a place where if like all of a sudden we had like 30 customers who wanted to use it tomorrow, like we couldn't do that. Not yet. Like we're probably like, maybe like 4, 6, 8 weeks away from like being able to like really onboard a lot of customers. So it's like, we're in this limbo stage for me as a sales founder. Like I just want to really go out and sell, but I probably have to be like a little bit patient. Like I'm building groundswell. I'm talking to a lot of people, but I can't be like trying to sell like a bunch, get people like using the platform because like the product isn't there yet. But the way that I think about like once we are fully ready to go to market, if I think of like, let's say like the 0 to 1 phase or like even like 0 to 2 million of ARR, I think like 2 million of ARR is really like this number that we have in our head of where we want to get to based on like the type of business that we're building. It's like, all right, if we get to 2 million, we can like, all right, we've got like enough to probably like pay ourselves. Like we want to pay ourselves. Like we can like reinvest in areas we want to reinvest, and we can kind of go from there. We've probably proven that like we've got something that is like valuable at that level of ARR. And so when I think about like how we're going to go to market, I think another big reason why like go to market tech made so much sense for myself and also Jason is like we've lived in this world, and like so much of our network is like go to market professionals, like either people who like we've worked with, who we've built relationships with. So it's like that to me is one of like the big things that we are going to lean into is our network. And I think a big part of that is referrals, which I've already like started to do on like calls where I'm asking for feedback, where I'm trying to like meet other revenue leaders just to get like feedback. I go into a call, ask for a bunch of feedback, and assuming it doesn't go terribly, I say like, hey, the most important thing you could do for me as a early stage founder is like, if I could have another conversation with one person in your network, here's 5 people that I think like you probably know because you worked with them that are like in the realm of who we want to talk to. And again, so many people want to help out. And so many people are like introducing me to other people to speak with. And so I think that's going to be like a really big channel of us going to market is like our current networks, referrals. And then I do think the brand building on LinkedIn is really important. And there's going to be an aspect of people who resonate with what we're posting, et cetera, that are then going to come in through that channel. So I think like, to me, doing the non-scalable things as a founder, like leaning into referrals, even I was telling someone this yesterday where I was like having a 30-minute conversation with someone who's probably not an ICP customer, but knows people in our ICP, like that is a worthwhile 30 minutes for me versus like maybe other outbounding tactics, because I'm going to have a meaningful conversation with this person and they're probably going to be willing to kind of like help me out and maybe introduce me to 1 or 2 people versus say like spending 30 minutes like cold emailing or what, any of those other like traditional outbounding tactics, which I have like opinions on. So I think that's going to be our like what we're going to lean into is kind of like those areas. I think of course we will probably test, but I'm truly asking myself where it's like a lot of people have a lot of opinions on cold calling, I would say, but it's like, that to me is when I think like maybe we test some of those channels, like those traditional like outbounding tactics. But I don't think like that really gets us from 0 to 2. At least that's my current opinion. Like I really do think like the community we build, the people we know, the referrals we ask for, like that's going to help us get to that mark versus like some more of the traditional methods.
I think that's so interesting what you said about doing some of the unscalable things, because I think sometimes, especially in this new kind of culture that we live in, we try to go straight to the scalable, but it's like, to get to the scalable, you often have to do the unscalable. Those conversations that you're having with people that might not be in your ICP are what help you to clarify your message, help you to find the product market fit, to then ramp it up. So if you go straight to scale with something that's not quite right, you're just going to scale rubbish, right?
100%. It's like, why try and go out with like, and again, a well-crafted message that's potentially relevant for these people, when the reality is it's like, I only have a few people using the product as it is. Like, I don't, it's like, I don't know what might be completely relevant. Like we think we know what's relevant, exactly. And we've had hundreds of conversations at this point. So I think that's 100% right. And I think that's interesting though, as the founder, where it's like, yeah, I think being the founder allows me to probably go out and have these types of conversations with people I know and ask for referrals. And that's where it's like, all right, if you start building on a team around you, like that may not become so scalable. Like, the 25-year-old AE BDR probably doesn't have the network that you might have as a founder who's been in the workplace for 20 years. And that's where like the non-scalable comes into like, all right, how do you then scale this from 1 to 2 to 5 to 10? So, so yes.
You kind of alluded to that you have some interesting thoughts about some of the outbound things. What are those?
Yeah. So when we were at Spotify, I mean, we also really leaned into referrals, and I just felt like cold calling, I think, is a means to an end, but it was not a primary channel for us. I looked at it as a way. It was more like an awareness play where it's like, maybe once in a blue moon, a buyer is picking up a cold call who we were selling to. We were selling to marketing professionals, but the reality is like, when we sold our biggest deal of the year, which was like a 5 million 2-year deal, like that was through a referral. Like someone walked us in the door to an executive, and it was like a 9-month sales cycle. And like that's where like a lot of our like biggest deals came from. But if I take a step back, it's like some people are like cold calling is the only way, and like other people are like cold calling doesn't work. I think it truly is like, who do you sell to? It's like, who is your buyer? Is your buyer the type of person who maybe is like an SMB business owner? They have their cell phone here, and maybe cold calling absolutely works. Where it's like, if I'm selling to CMOs, chance of them picking up a cold call is probably very, very slim. So it's like, I don't think there's a one size fits all like method for people based on like who you sell to, what you sell, etc. I was in a room, I was at like a sales dinner like last month, and like this is what we were talking about. And one person who has a very successful business, $1 billion company, she was like, we don't do any cold calls, and like clearly had like massive success, like never any cold. Where another person was saying like, we went from 0 to 100 basically only on cold calls. So like, again, I think it's like part of probably like what's the culture, who you're selling to, like what's the go-to-market motion. And I very much deeply believe, at least for like the current state, like probably not the way that we will scale, because again, I think me cold calling for 30 minutes right now versus having a conversation with someone for 30 minutes, like the chance of me getting in one meeting and that meeting go well is probably better if someone makes a referral versus like me cold calling a bunch of people. Doesn't mean cold calling may not work for us down the road. So I think it's just like, it's a time and place, it's who you sell to. But I do think that we've gone through like a large like transformation in the go-to-market industry in terms of like what was working 60 years ago, 70 years ago with automation to like now where we're at. It's just like you get pounded in your inbox and your phone. It's like constantly. So like the best way to get in is just find someone that's going to open that door for you.
I think that's so right. You have to know who you're targeting, what's the best place to reach them, and with what message. And I think referrals is probably quite an underrated thing at the moment. That's not something that you're really hearing a lot of people actually talking about or doing, especially for enterprise.
Totally. And I think people like know it's valuable, but it's kind of on the back burner. It's like, all right, it happens every now and then, but if you're intentional about this strategy, which we were, like we had one board member, we would meet with him for 30 minutes, almost like every 6 to 8 weeks. And we come with like 20 names that we did like a lot of research on. And like, we always got meetings out of that meeting. So I just think it's a really worthwhile strategy, so long as it makes sense for your business. Like obviously there's certain businesses it may not make sense for, but I think for a lot of people out there, it make a lot of sense.
Okay. And just as we close, I know when we first kind of started talking, you were talking about how, you're still quite early as a founder. I think there's a lot of value in, for people who are thinking about founding or people who are just starting, what's some of the advice that you would give for someone who's just starting out or is thinking about becoming a founder?
Just keep going. Like literally just keep putting one foot in front of the other. I truly, truly believe that is what it kind of takes, is like the resiliency to like want to do this and like have the passion to like go out and solve the problem you're solving for. Cause like it is, especially in the early days, I think it is so easy to probably give up. Like there was probably so many moments early on before I had my co-founders where I was probably, sitting down and I'm just like, am I even on to something? Like, what if I just like went back, like this was like not the next thing I'm going to do. Yeah. And like, it'd be no skin off anyone's back. It was just like the, 5 a.m. Saturday mornings that I wasted. And it'd be so easy to like have to give up at that point. But it's like, if you truly want to do it, I firmly believe it's all about just the resiliency to keep on going. And you feel that as you kind of continue on. And I think like even now it's like you hear about like the high highs and the lows you have as a founder. And you experience that. I experience that at times. And I was talking about it with another founder last week. He's like, that's real. It's like there's going to be days where it's just like you think like the sky's falling in and like you have no idea what you're doing. You made this huge like bet on yourself and risk. You're like, oh my God, I gave up my salary, all this. And it's just the will to like ignore those voices and keep on going. So I think like that's like the best advice is like, if you want to make it happen, just go and make it happen. Just keep on going. Like that is bar none. But then I think the second one, which I've mentioned earlier, is like really start putting yourself out there. Just go have conversations. Like if you're exploring a product or a problem space, like go have conversations. And like whether it's like trying to find co-founders, like interview people about the space, et cetera. Like just go put yourself out there. The third one, because that jogged some advice I gave someone. I think some of the best advice that I got early on was like when I had an idea, I just wanted to go and pitch it. And I spoke with a very successful founder who I still speak with this day. And his best advice was like, stop pitching. He's like, go talk to who you think your customer is going to be and just ask them some questions as if you're doing a sales call, like trying to do some discovery. He's like, because you think they have a problem or you think there's this problem. And if you pitch them, you're kind of like pigeonholing them, being like, oh yeah, that's kind of like a problem. Like you're going to get like a false positive there, where if you start asking questions and you start hearing things related to like the problem you have, then you're getting signal that this is actually a problem. And I thought that was like, it was like kind of like mind blowing type of advice. And he was a product founder. And I was like, this all makes sense because I'm like the excited sales guy, which is like, let me pitch you like the idea that I have. And so like that's when I made a mental shift there, and like I started asking questions. And so when Jason and I kind of like teamed up, that's what one of the first things we did was we went out and we talked with revenue leaders, and we didn't like pitch some of the ideas we had, like saying like, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? We just started asking questions and like pulling on threads that we kept hearing. So I think like that is some advice I'd give for people who are like in the ideation phase, is like, go out and talk to your customer and ask questions. Don't go and like pitch them ideas.
I love that. That's amazing. So Jordan, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your founder journey. I've definitely learned a lot from our conversation. And I know a lot of other people will too. So thank you so much.
Thank you totally for having me. This was great. Love to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us for the What Makes You Tick podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much value in hearing other people's career stories. And if you're someone focused on growing in your own career, check out our Growth Magnet newsletter on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And we will see you on the next episode.